Welcome back to another episode of Grizzly True Crime. My name is Xana Kernodle, and today we continue to look at the Idaho case, and I really want to read you this article because I find it very interesting how Dr. Phil had a panel of guests on, and just the things they had to say about Bryan Kohberger's potential motive. Based on everything we know so far, this makes sense to me, especially if you factor in his studies and things like that. So let's have a look at what they say here. Before I do, I also want to say that at the end of this video, I'm going to be playing a video for you, which is a 3D visual timeline. It's absolutely brilliantly done by a creator called AZ or AsGet on TikTok. So I will link her TikTok below as well. I believe she has a part 2 coming out soon, which I'll be very excited to see. So I'm going to play it for you in case you haven't seen it yet. So here they say, experts discussed damning evidence posted to social media by the suspect of the Idaho murders on Dr. Phil on Thursday. University of Idaho students Kaylee Goncalves, 21, Madison Mogen, 21, Xana Kernodle, 20, and her boyfriend Ethan Chapin were stabbed to death in the early hours of November 13th in Moscow, Idaho. Bryan Kohberger, a PhD student in criminology at nearby Washington State University, has been charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and felony burglary for the quadruple homicide. Dr. Phil encouraged his guests to take a look at a survey written by Kohberger and posted on Reddit. In the survey, purportedly for his graduate program, Kohberger asked criminals about how they planned and executed their crimes, with some phrasing that made Dr. Phil and his guests balk. Now, I do want to say that some criminology experts have emailed me and said that the questionnaire is not abnormal, and that I totally understand. Given the context of his studies, the questionnaire is not abnormal. The problem is now what he did with that knowledge, potentially, because he's a suspect in this case, and now being charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. Now the questions in hindsight, of course, become very interesting. Now his level of fascination with studying what it would feel like to be a killer becomes very interesting. He asked criminals to recount, did you struggle or fight the victim? How did you travel and enter the location that the crime occurred? The suspect also asked, what was the first move you made in order to accomplish your goal? He could have also been asking these questions to gain more inspiration and to add to his fantasy if he is indeed a fantasy killer. Now, trial attorney Mercedes Coleman suggested that the Reddit survey would be used against Kohberger in court. Of course, so would the other social media posts if the FBI, for instance, can prove that it was him writing those things, like the Inside Looking account on Reddit or Papa Roger on Reddit as well. I also just want to say a side note, based on my last live stream, I had quite the speculation there that if you want to check into it and give me your thoughts, go check it out and leave some comments below there. But what I do want to say is what's interesting is that SWAT team victim, the guy who was shot by the SWAT team, who's a former Army veteran with major PTSD and all of that. We've discussed that at length, so go check that out. But what's interesting is online on MySpace, his nickname was Papa. So imagine if it's Papa and Papa Roger, both of them with the initials BK. And this Papa guy, another BK, was also collecting knives, particularly machetes. I'll show you a picture here so that you can see what I'm talking about. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, I'm going to link the episode below for you that I did as a live stream. I know it's quite long, and if you're anything like me, if something is longer than 20 minutes, I'm like, I don't know, man, it just feels too long. But just know that when I do these live streams that are a bit longer, it is interesting discussions, and it would be worth looking at even at 1.5 speed, right? That's what I do. When things are long, you just toggle that little gear setting, and you watch it 1.5 or 2 times speed so that you can get all the information in minimal time. And that speculation, I can just see it's definitely brewing on the internet, and I'm not saying that that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's just interesting to consider, what if Bryan Kohberger had either an accomplice or that he was some kind of, like mental predator pushing someone to commit these acts so that he could study them, or that maybe someone was a getaway car, or whatever it is. It's just interesting to consider the possibilities, because as I said in my last episode, it would be really irresponsible of us to just be like, this is a slam dunk, he's guilty, because of course he's not. He's innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. At this point, he's the suspect, the lead suspect, the only suspect in this case. But we have to keep our minds open. So here they continue to say, if you match up that survey against the affidavit, it's mind-blowing, she said. The very first question he asked in that survey, where he's trying to ask about the emotions that people are feeling when they're committing crimes, is, how did you target your victims? Well, you go back to the affidavit and they go back to the 12 pingings of his phone in and around that crime scene. She also noted a second time when he appeared to follow criminals' advice. The second step, but what did you do in preparation for the crime? Well, if he's in fact the killer, obviously he's only a suspect, he turns the phone off, she noted. We know in the affidavit it says that the phone turned off for the duration of the time that he allegedly traveled to the home and committed the crimes. And then, only until he was back on the highway did the phone go back on. She observed all these steps that he asked these criminals in the survey he seems to have duplicated in the affidavit according to law enforcement. But then she asked, if he's the killer, what are we looking at? A sick social experiment? And those words caught my attention because it does feel like it, right? With Bryan studying criminal justice, being a PhD student at WSU, and just his fascination, perhaps speculatively, for serial killers or killers in general, I wonder if he didn't want to step into the shoes, and this is pretty obvious, but like step into the shoes of a killer and maybe even identify as one. We can see from his posts on that Tapa Talk site, which we're going to deep dive in a members and patrons only stream, which is coming up probably today, depending on when you're watching this. But on that forum, he does talk about depersonalization and derealization, and some mental health experts have even theorized that he could have struggled with a dissociative disorder. Now, the reason I point that out is because if he felt like nothing feels real, I never feel comfortable in my own skin, I never feel like myself. Well, if he felt like he resonated with, for instance, BTK, the killer, or these killers that he was studying, and he even said he wanted to offer counseling to killers or serial killers, well then, one can imagine that if he resonated so much with them and identified with them, maybe this was also something like, well, I'm just going to be a killer because then at least I know who I am. Do you know what I mean? So that's why I find that quite interesting when they say, what are we looking at? A sick social experiment. Even just to be part of the whole process firsthand. I mean, to him, it might be quite intriguing. And if he is given the death penalty, if he is found guilty, I have no doubt that he would be in his single cell for the rest of his life, however long that might be, because you know death row could sometimes take decades before someone is executed. Well, I have no doubt he'd be sitting there just like BTK with his books, you know, writing letters, maybe being interviewed by people, that there will be documentaries and things made about him. That is what I could see happening, which would be for him quite self-fulfilling in my opinion based on what we know about him so far.
I want no one to escape. But even after admitting this, there is no catharsis. My punishment continues to elude me, and I gain no deeper knowledge of myself. No new knowledge can be extracted from my telling. This confession has meant nothing.
Dr. Phil suggested, I think part of it is he's wanting to live vicariously through it. And part of it is he's wanting to know what to expect. Because I don't have normal emotions and I don't want to panic, I need to know what to expect and what to think. That's odd. He's asking odd questions. Now, John Kelly and his team, John Kelly's a criminal profiler, he's been on the show multiple times. On his channel called John Kelly Profiler, they just did an episode on Anhedonia, which is killing to feel alive, which is something that we've also speculated before could be the case based on Bryan Kohberger's own self-expressions on these Visual Snow and online forums. Senior reporter for Daily Mail, Caitlin Becker, focused on the way the survey was phrased. The word goal stands out to me too. How did you achieve your goal? I have goals. We all have goals. They're positive things. They're not crimes for the most part, she said. However, if you've ever studied serial killers, if you've ever done a deep dive on them, you'll know that they consider their serial killing as a career, as their goal, as their life's work, almost their legacy. Some of them, actually most of them, are quite proud of what they've done, as depraved as they are. So the fact that he's talking to criminals about their crimes and describing them as goals definitely struck me as odd, and that the person who's writing that question finds crime to be something to aspire to. Dr. Phil said that Kohberger's professor had said that these are typical questions for a criminology student, but said in the context and timing in which he does them, I don't believe in coincidence. Former FBI Special Agent Jonathan Gilliam said to Dr. Phil, the absence of evidence is often proof to a degree of guilt, because a criminal deliberately covered their tracks to make themselves appear innocent. Because when he turned his cell phone off, when he turned it back on, those are the absence of the cell phone. But you still have the videotape of the car. It's actually proof that he was structuring his behavior in a way as to not get caught, he said. Colwyn suggested he just thought that he was smarter than everybody else. I think that's where it flows from. And that is very consistent with what people who knew him, especially in high school and things like that, say, is that he always wanted to be the smartest person in the room. And that is why I say, is this guy a dumbass? Or is he some sort of evil genius? Most people would lean towards dumbass. I lean towards don't underestimate him. Because from what I see, he's not just as like this incel, loner, cut and dry, awkward dude as we might see the narrative being shared, right? This guy was apparently a heroin addict. He wanted to be an army ranger. In some photos, I mean, he looks quite buff, you know, he's a runner. He was a rapper. I mean, remember the rap I played for you the other day? It was part of my intro and it's horrible. Some people were like, Gezra, where did you get this music? It was him rapping.
Always the same thing that disrupts my life.
Like he was a rapper, and then he's like this person who loves to study crime. I just think, yes, he can make mistakes. And oftentimes, if someone has some sort of a God complex or thinks they're the smartest person in the room or high levels of narcissism or psychopathy or whatever these types of things are that actual experts would speculate and are speculating. If so, then sometimes, the ego can make them make really dumb mistakes, you know. And if this was the first time that he killed, if he is in fact the killer, then there could be room for error, of course. As much as he fantasized about it, the adrenaline in the moment could cause him to, for example, leave the knife sheath behind. But still, that one boggles the mind, doesn't it? I also think it's going to be difficult to prove that he was like at that house unless he's always like logging into the Wi-Fi. That's not proven that he did. That is something that Kaylee's dad said, that he was so close that he even logged into the Wi-Fi. But the thing is, that cell tower that shows that he was in the proximity of the house has something like a 10-mile radius, so it could be anywhere in the 10-mile radius and be in proximity of the house, you know what I mean? So as we know, cell phone pings are not very accurate. They don't really hold up in the court of law. However, marrying all the probable cause together is what makes it very interesting and seems like a slam dunk to most people, right? I'm just worried about the possibility of him being acquitted or exonerated or something like that, or in some way like pulling a rabbit out of a hat and just, I don't know, somehow being set free. And of course, if he's innocent, he absolutely should be set free. But Moscow PD is confident that they have caught the guy who committed these crimes. They believe that he's the only one that committed these crimes. So we'll just have to wait and see with this whole legal process, which will take many, many months. As we know, it's like 5 or 6 months until the next hearing. So we'll just have to sit tight, be patient. I hope you enjoyed this little article that I brought to you today because I just found it interesting. Don't you think that would be quite the motive for him as a speculative fantasy killer to then do this as a social experiment? It could be. Of course, he could have been driven by deep-seated rage, revenge. He's tired of being bullied, tired of being laughed at by girls, tired of being an outcast. All of that plays a part, of course. I think this is a complex motive, in my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm going to leave you with that 3D visual representation of the timeline. And make sure that you are subscribed, hit the bell so that you know when I'm next going live or uploading something for you. I upload often. I'm mostly here every day, mostly. So make sure that you don't miss out, and I will see you in the next one. Stay safe.
In the beginning, most of us believed the 2 surviving roommates, Bethany and Dylan, were sleeping on the first floor. Since then, we've learned Dylan was sleeping here on the second floor, along with Xana and Ethan located here. Kaylee and Madison were located here on the 3rd floor. The dog was located on the 3rd floor and the room by itself. Let's move around and see through the walls into the kitchen, to the back slider, and take a look at the time frames. At 4:04 a.m., the suspect can be seen trying to park his car. At 4:09, approximately 5 minutes later, he enters the house through the back slider. At 4:18, he leaves the house after committing the crimes. At 4:20, He's caught on camera driving away at a high rate of speed. All of this only took 9 minutes. Let's watch what that looks like. The suspect enters through the back sliding door. He pauses at the stairs to look around to make sure no one's up. He then turns and goes upstairs. The first bedroom he stops at and opens the door, he sees no one there. He continues to the next bedroom. Here we know what happens. Downstairs, Dylan is sleeping. The noise from upstairs wakes her up. She thinks it's Kaylee playing with her dog. She gets up and goes to the door and looks out. She sees nothing there. The suspect then continues down the stairs about 3 minutes later. He then heads to Xana's room. Outside there's a security camera picking up some whimpering, cries, and a thud at 4:17. We've learned that Xana was found on the floor, which might explain the thud. Dylan again hears something and looks outside her door. She sees the suspect. He walks right past her and leaves.